this is Deborah Holchip, editor of Michigan Today. In this episode of Listen in Michigan, I have a story that started 50 years ago at Michigan Daily. Seemed pretty straightforward at the time, but it takes a major unexpected twist in the present. It starts on May 15, 1968, and student photojournalists Andy Sachs and Jay Cassidy join the Detroit Press Corps, tracking Robert F. Kennedy as he campaigns for the Democratic Party's nomination for president. Little did they know at the time, they were capturing some of the final images of RFK's life. He was assassinated 3 weeks later. But on that day in Detroit, it was just another assignment. And these guys were pretty confident and competent, and they held their own alongside the national press. They were standing in convertibles, elbow to elbow with the likes of Life magazine's Bill Epridge and other pretty well-known people, shooting pictures of an energized crowd literally engulfing RFK's open-air motorcade. Well, one day in late 2017, Andy Sachs heard from a friend who'd seen his photo on the cover of the RFK biography, Bobby Kennedy, A Raging Spirit by Chris Matthews of MSNBC. Andy had licensed some of his pictures from that day to Getty Images, but this was the first Andy had even heard of this. And that's when the story takes a turn. If you've seen the book, RFK is leaning from an open-air convertible and an aide's arm is wrapped protectively around his waist. The car is surrounded by kids, a crowd of mostly African-American boys, and hands are outstretched in an exuberant sort of wanting. A man holds a young girl aloft in one massive hand, and she's reaching out to Bobby, clutching an 8x10 of the candidate, and he's smiling at her. It's like the most gorgeous image you've ever seen, and it's Andy's. But the book jacket from Simon & Schuster reads, Bill Epridge, that photographer from Life magazine. Andy's only consolation? Bill Epridge was a great photographer. And if anyone's credit is going to show up on one of your photos, well, I spoke to Andy about his legal struggles to correct the photo cover credit, and you can read the story at michigantoday.umich.edu. I also reached out to Jay Cassidy, the Oscar-nominated film editor, whose latest project is the remake of A Star is Born, starring Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper. In the phone conversation that follows, Andy and Jay recount that day 50 years ago and take us back to the streets of Detroit in May 1968. The first voice you will hear is Andy Sachs.
Take a look at that. That's where we were 50 years ago. That's how far we've come. Where this one man, no bulletproof vest, leans right into the crowd, wants to touch everybody. Everybody wants to touch him. We didn't think we were chronicling history exactly on the day. I think what really struck me harder, which made more of an impression on my own psyche, is that 50 years later is when our work really starts to have extraordinary value.
It's the idea of there's a certain witness to events and these are items that are direct witnesses to the event that can't be argued.
You can't dispute the crowd size.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the importance that, as you say, 50 years later, that, you certainly didn't anticipate and weren't thinking about at the time. Part of the reason that I was involved in photography was that you were a witness to certain events. And I think you understood that role.
Early
on. You might
on.
not have been able to articulate it at the time, but what stories are told from these pictures. But as they say, being there is the first draft of history.
The next voice you'll hear is Jay's, who, much like Andy, had no idea the historical trove of imagery he was sitting on.
What was always interesting about the daily photographs is you'd shoot them, you'd process them, and then you'd pick two, maybe, that would go in the paper. And then you wouldn't look at them for a long time. His assassination certainly made me go back to the pictures right afterward to just see what I had. I don't know if you know, I donated my collection to the Bentley Library, yes. And you had to scan them. And I sort of made the decision, well, let's just scan them all, because if you don't know really what you had, because you haven't looked at them in 45 years, and you didn't really look at them hard on the day.
You're on deadline.
Yeah. The reasons you chose a picture or somebody else chose from your contacts a picture for the particular day's paper, like there's a whole other set of considerations when you look at it later and out of that context. So I was amazed at what was there.
One of the frames that I didn't pick to publish back in 1968 has been selected because I sent about a dozen images over to Getty Images back in 2006. Robert Kennedy seemed like he was, a historic figure, and I thought I should get these pictures in front of the world. And then one day, a friend of mine, he wrote me an email. He said, I saw the photograph on the cover of the Chris Matthews book, and I had seen that book advertised and had seen Matthews hold it up, but I thought, it's probably from one of those swings in the campaign, one of the cities. And my friend Paul Lee said, it looks like it's your picture, because I had shared some contact sheets of the Detroit visit with Mr. Lee. We checked at the bookstore, and sure enough, there was a picture that looked like it could have been one of mine, but it was credited to Bill Epridge on the dust cover. So I thought, well, he must have been just shoulder to shoulder with me in that convertible that day. And, there it goes. It's kind of the Life magazine guy, they get the money shot. But I wasn't convinced. So I sent a copy of the picture that I had with Getty and also a copy of the book cover from an ad. I sent it out to Jay, actually, and asked him, did he think they were identical? And he said there's no doubt they were the same frame. But it had Bill Epridge's name on it. So that began a saga with the publisher Simon & Schuster. It still is ongoing today. The tech person in the art department swapped out a picture that they had dummied in, shot by Mr. Epridge. I guess I knocked him out of the cover spot, but they did not cover the detail. They did not get that credit line changed.
As maddening as the error is, Andy still remembers Bill Epridge fondly. He learned a lot from him that day 50 years ago. Epridge died in 2013.
He was someone who I knew about from his work in Life magazine. He shot a remarkable photo essay that they ran under the story title as Needle Park, and it was, I believe, in New York City. He got really up close with his whole group of drug addicts. He then was 26 when he did that work. When we ran into him, he was 29. And I looked up to him as a veteran Life magazine guy, but really he was only 9 years older than me. And I just watched the way he handled himself and the way he handled the cameras, and it was kind of instructive there because you can't pick that stuff up by reading a book on photography. And he was very, very dapper. He wore a suit jacket and a tie with a four-hand Windsor knot, and he seemed to be able to keep all those things looking good throughout the day. Where the pictures that I've seen that Jay shot of me, it looked like I was pretty disheveled trying to keep up with everything. But it was exciting to be with those guys. It was like you were a trumpet player and Miles Davis invited you up to sit in with his band.
Okay, on stage in a moving open-air motorcade, that is. I don't know about you, but I love hearing about all the streets and the specific locations of the motorcade.
I just remember we went to the airport, and that's where we got on the bus ride into Detroit to Cadillac Square, where the first event was, which was a very large rally. And I think he actually maybe went into the hotel. I think there's a hotel on Cadillac Square.
The Sheraton Cadillac would have been, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that was actually the first stop. And then the motorcade was formed, and the photographers kind of were in the following car or the leading car. That's kind of where it formed. And then after this quite large rally, I believe the next stop was the AME Church. I looked at all the pictures last night, and there was some event going on with the AME Church because there was kind of a banner. And I remember his speech, inside, and I also remember because of the pictures, he had maybe a 8 or 10-year-old boy who he brought up and kind of was introduced to the crowd, and he spoke very eloquently about the future of this kid, and the audience was quite moved by his kind of short but quite poignant speech. It was very chaotic, and the crowds, I think, were, especially at Cadillac Square and then outside the hotel. I mean, they were, I don't think they quite anticipated what they were going to have there. Like going up 12th Street, every third block, the car would stop and the crowd would surround him, and he'd either shake hands or give a little impromptu talk. After they left the church, they went up 12th Street and then over across, I don't know what street, to sort of the Hamtramck region.
I think we went out Jefferson Avenue because I have a picture of the candidate underneath the overpass that has a Jefferson Avenue plant walkway.
Yeah. Chance has a lot to do with being in the right spot, to take any kind of interesting photographs. And sometimes you're lucky and sometimes you aren't.
The most interaction I had with him was standing, and I believe I was standing on the left side of him. He reached out to shake some hands, and someone grabbed him really hard, and he started to lose his balance. And I put my camera down and kind of jerked him back upright, just kind of grabbing the shoulder of his suit jacket, and I think he said thanks. That might have been the extent of our conversation. I think a lot of people, myself included, looked at Robert Kennedy as his brother incarnate. This is as close as I'm going to get to his brother, who I really liked and was taken away from us 5 years earlier. And this guy offers hope to our country, and I had a great hope that he would become the next president. And never in the back of my mind.
He had evolved from the lawyer who was on Roy Cohn's staff, and from when he was Attorney General, and he had evolved as a politician and as a human being, and I think that was clear from everything he said.
He was sympathetic, but he talked straight. 20 years old. What do you expect from your country and your government? That the best leaders among us would be slain? Well, I was in the 10th grade, I think, 11th grade when John Kennedy was shot. Life just stopped for those 4 or 5 days until he was buried. That left a real mark on me, and then to fast forward the clock past when he was in Detroit, and I was watching the California returns on television. It was really sad, but on the other hand, I thought, okay, I guess this is the America I live in.
And don't forget Martin Luther King, a month before or 2 months before. That was a very traumatic year for the country. 1968. Well documented. There was this group in the crowd, especially at Cadillac Square and in front of the hotel, that was a kind of a extremist group that would put these signs out that, Bobby, give us your blood, all of it. I looked at the pictures in front of the hotel, and the people with that sign actually got quite close to Kennedy. These crowds were enormously appreciative and adoring, especially when you got up on 12th Street. But they're, the seeds of American extremism, were well planted.
But Andy and Jay didn't really have time to think about much other than the work before them for the Michigan Daily. Both credit the Michigan Daily with helping them grow up as young men and grow into their careers as successful photojournalists and artists.
Listen, the Kennedy campaign encouraged university presses. They knew that was a strength that they could take advantage of by allowing someone such as me and Andy and I think Okrent went on that trip as the writer. Isn't that right?
It was Philip Block who wrote about Detroit, and then I think Okrent went with us to Indiana.
Indianapolis, yes.
Both Jay and I were carrying Leica rangefinder cameras, which I think gave us a little more credibility in the eyes of the working national and international press photographers, because those tools were quiet, precise, lightweight. They were really, the gold standard of photojournalism for a lot of people. And he had one, and I had one. We owned a lot of our gear outright. The paper didn't buy a lot of camera equipment for the photographers. So I thought, okay, this is a big deal. I don't think I had, ridden in one of these big motorcades like this, where they had open cars for the news cameraman and the still photographers, and that was a real treat because it kept you a fixed distance from the action, even though it was continuously changing. I talked with a friend of mine the other night, and she said, well, when you're 20 years old, you don't think you're inexperienced.
It helped us as teenagers grow a lot, the Michigan Daily. I mean, because we were thrust into, a situation where you're dealing with adults and you have to deal with them, because that's the mandate of the paper.
If I look back at the pictures of me that Jay shot, for instance, I looked pretty green and kind of unkempt, but I was concentrating on what was going on. We kind of knew the ropes, and we were going to go about our job and get some good pictures from the day. Do you have any sense of that, Jay?
Yeah, look, the ethos of the Michigan Daily was we're a national newspaper, and we're going to cover stories like a national paper. So when there was activity on a national level in the geographic area, the Daily covered it. So,
or beyond the geographic area.
And beyond the,
Larry Robbins and I went to Cape Canaveral because we didn't think they should shoot a rocket to the moon without us witnessing it.
Yeah. So that part of that certainly is the arrogance of youth to kind of, but at the same time, it's why the paper was respected, is because it did assume a kind of an attitude that that said, well, there's the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Michigan Daily.
Well, maybe not in that order. No, we were spunky, and many of the people working on the paper in that era went on to work for those other papers.
Oh, yeah.
And on the campus, it was like we had journalistic exercises maybe once a month in the 60s, the late 60s. There's always going to be a demonstration or a march or a big football event even. We didn't have to walk out more than 3 or 4 blocks from the newspaper office to run into, an event that would train you and tax you and teach you how to cover these things. And that this fella Kennedy, when he was out there, he wasn't a big guy, but he was agile and he could move. His body language was expressive, and I think that helped us a lot too.
Well, it certainly helps when you have a subject that leans into the scene and leaned into history the way RFK really did. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Read more about Andy's issues with Simon & Schuster in the story at michigantoday.umich.edu, and you can also view some of his amazing photography there. Jay's archive can be accessed at U of M's Bentley Historical Library. Find more episodes of Listen in Michigan at TuneIn, Stitcher, and iTunes, as well as at Michigan Today under the podcast tab. All right, it's time to go enjoy some summer in Ann Arbor.